Are there any bill introductions this morning? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the hearing on House Bill 2492, which is submitting claims against the state by the Joint Committee on Special Claims against the State. So to give us a bill brief, I'll now turn it over to Merle Riedel from the Legislative Research Department. Merle.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Merle Riedel. I am an analyst with the Legislative Research. I am also staff for the Joint Committee on Special Claims against the State. Today, I'll be reviewing House Bill 2492. So I'll be briefing from a TAN document that is titled House Bill 2492 Claims Against the State. This is the annual claims bill. The Joint Committee on Special Claims Against the State recommends payment of claims that would total $2 million, including $1.9 million from the State General Fund, as outlined in House Bill 2492. Of this, 2 claims would be paid from additional SGF appropriations, and I will point those out when we reach those claims. And the remaining would be paid with existing resources, which would result in an increase of $1.9 million from state expenditures. Just very quickly, an overview of kind of the process that's used for the Claims Committee. Written claims are submitted throughout the year. Affected agencies are asked to investigate the matter and provide written response. The Joint Committee conducts public hearings from July to November with both the claimant and the responding agency, after which recommendations are submitted to the Legislature in the form of a bill, which is what you see here today. During the 2021 interim, the Joint Committee met 4 times, and excluding motor vehicle fuel tax refunds, they heard 79 claims, the majority of them which were filed against the Department of Corrections or correctional facilities. That amount of 79 is fairly average with previous years. Looking on the bill on Section 2, pages 1 through 2, the Joint Committee recommendation totaled $784 from the Department of Corrections, and those claims included Stanley Woolley, an inmate at the Lansing Correctional Facility, seeks $33 for compensation of battery charger, and an MP3 player charger that he claims was misplaced by staff during a mass movement of inmates from the old Lansing Correctional Facility to the new facility in April 2020. The Joint Committee recommends full payment of that claim. Alan Todd, an inmate at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility, seeks $500 for compensation of a gold chain necklace with a crucifix medallion that was confiscated by staff and never returned. KDOC confirmed the necklace was seized due to exceeding the value allowed by policy for a religious necklace, which is $20. However, the agency acknowledges that the whereabouts of the necklace are unknown and recommends payment of $20. Typically, in the instances where property is seized and determined not to be illicit, the inmate is afforded the opportunity to return that material to their family member. The Joint Committee recommends partial payment of the claim, or $50. Travis Becker, an inmate at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility, seeks $515 of compensation for a stolen television and other items. The Joint Committee recommends partial payment of the claim for the amount of the television, which was $250. Moving on to the second page, you'll see the second bullet point there, word ackward. An inmate at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility seeks $76 of compensation for shoes he stated went missing after staff packed his property following his assignment to segregation housing. The Joint Committee recommends full payment of that claim. Willie Simmons, an inmate at the El Dorado Correctional Facility, seeks $21 of compensation for a canteen order he states was placed in his name without authorization and was wrongfully delivered by staff to his cellmate. Canteen items generally include packaged food or personal hygiene products. Joint Committee recommends full payment for that claim. Roger Deere, an inmate at the El Dorado Correctional Facility, seeks $296 of compensation for personal eyeglasses seized by staff. The Joint Committee notes a receipt from 2006 indicates that the purchase value of the eyeglasses was $189 and recommends partial payment for a depreciated value, which is $138. Clinton Ross, an inmate at the El Dorado Correctional Facility, seeks $441 for property he stated went missing when he was moved to protective custody and staff left his cell unsecured for a period of 2 days. The Joint Committee recommends partial payment for approximately half the value of the claim, or $200. Moving on to Section 3 on page 2 of the bill, the Joint Committee recommendation includes $1,144 from the Adjutant General's Department. Scott Heston seeks compensation for the repair of damages sustained by his vehicle while on the grounds of the Armed Forces Reserve Center in Topeka. The Adjutant General's Department confirmed the damage was caused by debris from a lawnmower operated by an agency employee. The Joint Committee recommends full payment of that claim. Moving on to Section 4 on page 2, the Joint Committee recommendation includes an appropriation totaling $1.9 million SGF to the Office of Secretary of State for payment of 2 claims. These claims arise from judgments against the Secretary of State for payment of the plaintiff's attorney fees in 2 federal lawsuits that successfully challenged the constitutionality of voter proof of citizenship provisions enacted by the 2011 legislature. The claimed amount reflects a court settlement negotiated by the Attorney General. The Attorney General noted that when the lawsuits were initially filed in 2015, the Secretary of State at the time expressed a desire to handle legal representation himself. The Attorney General clarified that payment of judgments from the Kansas Tort Claims Fund, which is the more frequent method for paying such settlements, can only be provided if the Office of Attorney General handles representation. The Secretary of State indicates that the agency does not have adequate existing resources adequate for payment of these claims. And indeed, the agency has an operating budget of approximately $4 million annually, primarily from fee funds. Moving on to page 3, you'll see the 2 bullet points lists those 2 claims which would require the additional appropriation. The first claim is the ACLU Foundation of New York seeks $1.4 million for attorney fees and costs owed as a result of a federal court order related to the Fish case, which was the first case in the federal court ruling. Denton's U.S. LLP of Kansas City, Missouri seeks $475,000 for attorney fees and costs owed as a result of a federal court order related to the Bassinet case, which was the second case involved in the federal ruling. Moving on, Section 5 on page 2 of the bill. The Joint Committee recommendation includes $47,788 from the Department of Revenue. OneNIC IT Solutions seeks the reimbursement of credits resulting from excess prepayment of sales tax from January 2013 to November 2015. The claimant states notification of the matter was submitted to the Department of Revenue in January 2016. The agency confirmed the claim's prepayments resulted in an overage on its sales tax account during the period in question. However, the agency disputes the date of notification and states that sales tax refunds cannot be provided if more than 3 years has passed since the last filing period, pursuant to KSA 76-3609. The Joint Committee recommends full payment of the claim amount. Moving to Section 6 on page 2 and 3 of the bill, the Joint Committee recommendation includes $29,457 from the Department of Revenue's Motor Vehicle Fuel Tax Refund Fund. Requests for refunds must be received within 1 year after the date of purchase. If refund request is submitted after that date, the claim must be filed with the Joint Committee. Refunds are allowed for taxes paid on fuel used for off-highway uses, such as school bus and farming. Section 6, pages 3 and 4 of the bill, the bill would require a signed release prior to payment being issued. This release requires the claimant to attest that the matter is settled. Section 8, page 4, the bill would be in effect upon publication in the Kansas Register. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my summary. I'm happy to stand for questions.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions from anybody? Yeah, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the issue in Section 4 on the cases, those were filed in 2015, and I assume the judgment was made where the Secretary of State's office then had to pay that judgment, or was this for defense? Anyway, we just have to true that up with the Secretary of State's office at this point. Is that accurate?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Representative Johnson, what your first scenario is the correct scenario. These cases were filed in 2015 and 2016. They were later appealed and rolled into one case in the court ruling. The state did not prevail on that matter, and that resulted in a court settlement to cover the cost of the attorney fees for the plaintiffs in that case.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? Representative Helgerson.
My memory is that there was a large case a year ago or a couple of years ago with regards to an individual that moved out of state, sold some pizza operations, and I think the state was on the hook for 50 or 60 million. Was that ever rectified?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Helgerson, I'm not familiar with that claim, so I'm not sure if that came through the Claims Committee or through another situation.
Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you're speaking of Gene Bicknell would be the name, and I think they're up. We went after him for a large sum of taxes, even though he wasn't a Kansas resident. He went ahead and paid that while the cases were pending. He went to court. I think he won. They challenged it, and then he lost. And he's back in now. It's in front of the Supreme Court. I think he paid $25 million or somewhere around that, and with interest, we owe him about 70 right now. So something we should look at on a year like this, but it's going to do nothing but get larger, and he'll probably end up getting it. Thanks.
Representative Helgerson.
The reason I bring it up is a $70 million liability. I'm just wondering where it shows up. You know, I don't see that it's listed anywhere as a possible liability or that we're on the hook for it, and at least it should be noted somewhere that that we may end up losing $70 million. And we've already lost $70 million. It's just whether or not the Supreme Court's going to rule anything else. So.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So, Merle, I'm just wondering if you'll agree with this statement that sometimes with this committee, you know, we say, oh, it's not one of the most important committees. I mean, it's this, we met for 4 days, but 79 inmates in our state institutions were able to talk to legislators. And we paid 7 of those 69 claims, were from the Department of Corrections. And it may seem unimportant that we're paying $33 or $50, but I just want to commend the state for giving folks an opportunity to do that. And it is important. And we didn't pay many of them, but they got a chance to be heard. And I think that was important. So thank you for your work on that.
Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you the only one we're going to discuss this with, or are there people in the audience I don't know? Because it's a hearing. But I have a question about Roger Deere, and so it may not be Merle to answer that. Roger Deere, the eyeglasses, it seems to me, I mean, $296, that's about what I pay for glasses. And you have to have an examination to get the right glasses. And so I'm not understanding why they would depreciate that, because he's going to need glasses if he hasn't already bought them. And I don't understand why. It's almost a medical necessity. Why would we not? Is there, the question for you is, does it require him to have an eye examination, and was that figured in the cost?
Mr. Chairman, I can respond to that. Representative Carlin, these would be personal eyeglasses that were sent to him by family members. All correctional facility inmates have access to eye care services provided through the state, through the correctional facility. They're also issued eyeglasses as an inmate, and these are standard eyeglasses. So these were personal eyeglasses in addition to the standard eyeglasses that the correctional facility would issue him. And so those eyeglasses, the Eye examination services for the standard eyeglasses are provided to him at no cost, as well as the standard glasses.
Thank you. I'm glad you cleared that up because I can understand that better now. Thank you.
All right, yeah, and we are going to have Clay Barker from the Secretary of State's going to be a proponent here as soon as we get done with questioning. Yeah, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And here, I've heard of one dispute that I don't know if it came before the committee, and that was on a fence that was destroyed by the Department of Wildlife and Parks in Trego County. Did that come up at any time?
Mr. Chairman, that was not a claim submitted, at least during this last interim. That was not a claim that was submitted or heard by the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, any other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Merle. All right, next we have Clay Barker, Deputy Assistant to the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to testify in support of the appropriation of the Secretary of State's office. I just wanted to be very quick and then open it up for any questions on this because it is rather a large amount compared to the others. And Merle explained it very well. The lawsuit was begun against the state back in 2015. Secretary Kobach declined to ask for the Tort Claims Fund and the Attorney General to represent the state. We ended up, the state, losing the case. Because the Secretary of State is a fee-funded agency, it has no ability to pay the amount, which is why we had to go to the Special Claims Committee, and we gave you all some testimony on that. The settlement itself, having some experience with litigation, I thought was very good. It was plausible. The plaintiffs could have gotten up to $4 million if it had been litigated in front of the judge, how much their plaintiffs' fees would be. And as was explained, it was two separate plaintiffs with two separate law firms. The ACLU was one and Denton's was the other. That's why it's two amounts. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for any questions on this amount.
Representative Helgerson.
For those of us that are unfamiliar, Ken, do you have a summary of what the cases were and how and why we lost them?
Yes, Representative. Now, I wasn't part of it. I was watching it from afar at the time, but the state passed a law that required proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. That was
that? When was that?
2012.
Okay.
And that was immediately challenged by several plaintiffs, including the two represented by Denton's and the ACLU. It was litigated at trial in 2018. The state lost. It was appealed to the 10th Circuit. The state lost, and this is when the Attorney General took over the case, and there was a request for cert at the U.S. Supreme Court, which was denied. And at that point, the issue of plaintiffs' fees came up because this was a civil rights case. The plaintiffs prevailed. They get their fees, reasonable fees paid. And instead of litigating that issue, we entered into settlement negotiations, and my hat's off to the Attorney General's staff for good work on that.
Representative Helgerson.
I see it in a little bit more detail. Do you have I assume you provided testimony to the committee, correct? About, and not just a summary of this?
Yes, Representative. We gave the Special Claims Committee, the Attorney General actually drafted it, testimony, background testimony. Both the Secretary and the Attorney General personally appeared before the Special Claims Committee to explain, and I reproduced that same testimony for this committee.
You have?
We submitted it yesterday.
The in-depth, I'm looking for that copy, is it?
You should have this
Okay.
from the Secretary of State's office.
Oh,
Be a
got it.
two-pager with our seal.
Are there any other outstanding claims that are before the state right now? Do we have any other lawsuits that we should be prepared for?
None that would come by this route because Secretary Schwab gives all litigation to the Attorney General where it probably belongs. So they're covered by the Tort Fees Fund
Okay,
and can be budgeted.
thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Barker? Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the explanation. And it seems to me we passed a law allowing the Secretary of State to represent himself, and was that like for this? Anyway, the question is, when we did that, were there no funds behind that to pay for any?
Representative, you might be thinking when the law was passed allowing the Secretary of State to prosecute election crimes. That means a little different.
Prosecuting election crimes. All right, thank you.
But the office back when this trial was going on made no provision to put funds away in case they lost. And they couldn't tap the tort fees fund because they were defending it themselves. Secretary Kobach was, and not the Attorney General's staff.
And is that law still in effect?
The prosecutorial authority is still in effect, but it really doesn't come in here because in that case, the state is the plaintiff, the prosecutor.
And there is no funding.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And Representative Helgerson, there is a case that currently the Attorney General is defending it, so it wouldn't come this route, but it's the one about applications for advanced mail ballots coming from outside the state, where we settled in a federal lawsuit recently, and part of it's still ongoing. Those plaintiffs' fees will have to be paid, but I believe that'll come from the tort fees fund, if that's what you were thinking of.
Representative Helgerson.
Do you know how much that we settled for?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Barker? All right, see none. Thank you for being here and testifying in regards to House Bill 2492. That is the only individual that I'm showing as proponent testimony for House Bill 2492. If there's anybody else that wishes to be a proponent, here's your chance. We'll go ahead and move on. I'm not showing anybody as opponent or neutral testimony, so if there's anybody that wishes to address the committee in opponent or neutral testimony, this is your time to do so. And seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 2492 with the special claims against the state. All right, committee, we're going to go ahead and move on to working House Bill 2712. If you recall, that is establishing the Kansas Commission for the United States Semi-Quincentennial. So I would entertain a motion in regards to House Bill 2712. Representative Estes.
I move passage of House Bill 2712.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Carlin. Discussion on the motion. Representative Estes.
I just wanted to point out that on the fiscal note, a second fiscal note was sent out because the first fiscal note included something like $59,000 or $60-something thousand for designing and hosting a website, and that didn't really belong there, so that take that reduction into mind on the fiscal note, please.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Any discussion on House Bill 2712? Seeing none, Representative Estes, you may move your motion.
I move my motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. House Bill 2712 is passed favorably for passage. Okay, committee, we're going to have a presentation this morning. I know we had some discussion when we had the Department of Ag's budget, where the Ag and Natural Resources Budget Committee had a recommendation in regards to some dollars dedicated towards rural housing. And then we had, during that conversation, we had stated that we would have a follow-up prior to working the budget, which hopefully we get to later on this morning. So we're going to have that presentation on the needs for rural housing and the dollar amount that was included in the Department of Ag's budget. And so the first individual that I would have in regards to presenting would be Allie Devine with Kansas Farm Bureau and the Kansas Corn Growers Association. We do have about 8 individuals who wishes to address the committee. So if you could limit your comments or your testimony to, say, 5 or 6 minutes, that'd be preferable. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Allie Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee, for hearing us today. I also want to thank Chairman Corbett and the subcommittee for helping us get here today. I want to briefly give you a little background. To almost 2 years ago, the Kansas Farm Bureau and the Kansas Corn Growers, the Northwest Economic Innovation Center and Sunflower Electric got together and we talked about what can we do to inspire and further economic development in rural areas. We set about having our own study done. We called upon experts who recruit companies from out of state to talk to us and prepare a study. They did that. And what came back was 41 recommendations, of which we focused on 2. Business development sites and housing, because those 2 things came up repeatedly as barriers to economic growth. If you will turn to page 3 on my testimony, I'm going to walk you through what we're asking today and why. Page 3. We're requesting $50 million as a one-time appropriation to basically incentivize rural economic development through housing. Most projects have to have people and they have to have places to live. So the request is $50 million one time to the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation. Why $50 million? We didn't just randomly get there. We looked at the numbers and what it costs to replace the 1% of poor housing, meaning inferior quality housing, would cost about $105 million. So we took and said, let's start with 50, and I'll explain why 50 makes more sense in a minute. The next thing we said, why do we want to go to the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation? Here's why. We went out and talked to bankers, we talked to economic development experts, we talked to people across the state. They uniformly supported the effort and the work of the KHRC. It is respected, it has been proven to be effective, it has annual reports, it reports to the legislature, they have a board that oversees it, they set out public plans with public input. So we felt like, why go to another place? Why start somewhere else? Let's look at their programs. Let's see what they can do. So then we looked at what their programs are. We talked about which ones were most effective for rural communities. And it came back to the moderate income housing, MIH program, and we're recommending $25 million of the 50 go there. The governor in her budget put together a place where she had $20 million in the MIH program. We're asking for the 50 on top of the 20. And again, we'll tell you the math in a second. The next, we talked about tax credit development financing. There are a number of bills that are moving through the system now that get to more tools for tax credits to inspire and incentivize developers to work in rural areas. If those bills don't pass, we still think there are programs that are effective, and we're asking for $10 million for those. If you do not understand how the MIH program works or the low-income housing programs work, there are some great charts that are attached to Director Ryan Vincent's testimony, and his testimony should be with you. It's at the back of his testimony. The next thing, during discussions about what we should fund and why, we talked about weatherization and first-time buyers down payment assistance. Weatherization is important because we have a number of old homes across the state that could be rehabilitated, improved, and we think that that would be a noble effort to keep those homes and make them habitable. Also, the first-time homeowners program is very much used and needed, and we think, again, it gives people an incentive to come and buy and stay in rural areas. Finally, we talked about the guaranteed financing. Sometimes, actually most of the time, today when you build a house for $100,000 in a rural community, because of the lack of appraisals, we made that house that cost $100,000 may come in at an appraised value of $80,000. To keep bankers interested in funding these homes, we want to be able to guarantee that amount between the $80,000 and $100,000. It's not a large amount of money, but it makes a difference in keeping people buying homes. So then the next thing we talked about, who's going to be eligible? And I want everybody to pay attention to this point. We're talking about counties with 60,000 in population or less, or cities with 60,000 population or less. Some of the programs, like the one I just talked about, that's part of House Bill 2268, they may have more restrictions, but the MIH program and most of the programs that we're talking about, that threshold is 60,000 and less. So if you're in Butler County or one of the counties that you may have more population than 60,000, but you have a city that is less, they could be eligible to participate. How are the funds going to be awarded? KHRC uses an RFP process. They're competitive. They will develop the criteria. They will look at things like the need in the community, whether it's tied to an economic development project, whether it is something that's going to substantially make a difference to keeping that community moving forward. Key. How are the funds leveraged? Probably the biggest reason we went back and talk about KHRC is for every dollar invested, it will turn 6 times. They are able to leverage it and make it worth more. So when we came back to you with 50 million, theoretically, it could turn into 300 million over time. That's why we thought this one-time investment really gets the ball moving. Now, people keep asking us, why do we need to use state funds for this purpose? You're going to hear from others who are developers and by far more experts in this area. The combination of things that happen in a rural community is the first. Unlike major urban areas, we seldom have speculative builders. They're built for a specific purpose because they can't gauge the demand. Second, because of appraisal problems over the time frames and the fluctuations we've seen historically, we need some support to keep those developers to where they can get the financing. And finally, when you go to a rural community, you're going to have higher costs because of the rural nature of it, where location's a different problem. And again, we sometimes have a shortage of labor. So, Mr. Chairman, I promised you I'd be quick, and that's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your brevity. Committee, are there any questions for Ms. Devine? Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How much of the 50 million would be part of the loan program?
We talked about it at 5, which you mean the last one, the 2286. It's item D.
Oh,
guaranteed.
okay, that's the loan part of
Yes.
it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned that generally speculative type housing projects can't happen in the rural community, and I understand why. With this, do you anticipate more of that happening or some of that happening?
Yes, and I'll tell you what, you're going to hear from some builders and finance people. They can give a great more detail than I.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Corbett.
How many counties did you say were eligible?
69, I think. 96. I'm not dyslexic, but close to it.
Yeah. And when you think of that 96 and the money you're asking for, that is not very much money per county to really accomplish a big deal, but it'd pay for some infrastructure and it'd get something going.
Thank you, sir. That's exactly what we're hoping.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so looking at your plan, how does this address our workforce shortage? We have a huge gap in contractors, builders, skilled labor, and I don't know that adding more money is going to address the root problem. The reason we can't get the new builds or the expansions is because we don't have people to do it. They don't want to build, they don't even want to bid on it in my area, which is just 10 miles east of Wichita.
Mr. Chairman, again, we're going to have builder and financing people come up behind you, but I want to tell you the key here is sometimes when we get a program going, we will attract builders from other states, which has been what has happened in other communities. In fact, again, the builders will tell you if we can incentivize it where they can come out and build more than one, we build a number of units, it can make a difference. And I'm not going to deny it's tough, but we have to start somewhere. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say that my only concern is that we're going to be competing with these dollars with private sector that's also trying to compete to try to win the contractors. And I just think that we don't have a surplus of labor. That's our biggest problem. Thank you.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions here on first-time home buyers down payment. Is that a grant or is that a low-interest loan on top of the other loan?
Mr. Chairman, may I phone a friend? Because we have the people from KHRC who can answer both of those parts.
Yes, you may.
I can wait.
And we'll have KHRC
Okay,
presenting as well.
Wait. Thank you.
So that question can be
Sorry
posed to
about
them
that.
at that time. Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick question. The 50 million, Ally, that you're suggesting is one time. Remind me, maybe, Chairman, or the moderate income housing 20 million was ongoing or one time?
In the governor's budget, that was one time.
It was one time. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think when we had the discussion with KHRC, there was a demand of 10 million. We give an allocation of 2 million each year, but that is
Right.
not meeting the demand of the applications they have received. And then the governor's budget, she had a one-time of $20 million for moderate income housing.
On top of that 10 that would have been ongoing?
No, it'd be 20 total.
Okay.
Or 22 total.
Right.
The 2 million allocation
Plus
an additional 20 million.
Okay, thank you.
That's what she has in her budget.
Thank you.
Representative Carlin.
Thank you. Something that I'm not sure, you went really fast, Ally, that you said, but this this money is not divided out between the 96 counties, but they can apply for it when they have a need. And I just want to be sure that everybody understands it follows the need in order to encourage economic development, correct?
That is correct. In fact, it's twofold. What you're going to hear in a few minutes from other speakers is that we have projects that are ready to go. Businesses who are ready to expand, but they have no housing for additional employees. You're going to hear that. You're going to talk about, we have a major cheese plant coming into Southwest Kansas with $1 billion investment and a potential for 1,000 jobs. We have to have places. So you're going to hear more about that, but that's the desire.
And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for Ms. Devine? Representative Ballard.
Thank you. I think you said a key word for me. We have developers coming in and other people interested, but you do not have housing available for them. So not only do we have a workforce shortage, but we also have that even if an employer wanted to come in, they may not be able to find any housing for their people at all. And as a result, not only would you not have the home, but you might lose the person or the business that was interested in coming. Am I correct?
You are absolutely correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Not seeing any further questions. We'll go ahead and move on to the next presenter. Thank you, Ally, for being here. The next presenter that I have is Claire Gustin from the Sunflower Electric Power Corporation. Welcome to me, Claire.
Thank you. Good morning. And I will be very brief. I promise everyone can read. I've been doing rural development since the mid-1980s. Some of you know me as a lobbyist. I've represented Sunflower Electric for about almost 15 years. But my long-running job is economic development. And I have to say, in Western Kansas, I have never seen the situation we have today. I have never seen so much opportunity. And on my testimony is just a snapshot of opportunities in a number of counties, existing businesses that are expanding, opportunities not only in ag equipment manufacturing or other ag areas, which we are known for, but also in technology. What is also different is, yes, we've known that we have a housing problem for decades because of, houses get built 1 and 2 at a time typically. We just don't have the opportunity for big housing development. What's happened in specifically the last 18 months is what housing inventory we had is gone because of people that have moved into our state from other areas. And when I talk to economic development folks in all parts of the state, It's happened everywhere. I know it's happened in Kansas City and Wichita also, as people moved out of larger urban areas. Sometimes they came for a job, sometimes they came just to get away from the city, but where we had some inventory in many of these communities for housing, again, 18 months ago, we're really at a dire situation because, to your point, if these business opportunities, I mean, we're talking, you know, hundreds of jobs, good paying jobs. If these people who want these jobs don't have a place to put their head at night, they aren't going to be able to bring their families, and they aren't going to be able to help grow these rural communities. So thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gustin. Any questions for Ms. Gustin? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to Alex Orell from the Kansas Bankers Association. Alex?
Good morning, committee. Good to see everyone. I am Alex Orell, appearing on behalf of the Kansas Bankers Association, representing the 99% of the headquartered banks operating in Kansas that employ 22,000 Kansans that provide financial service in every single county of our state. I am absolute pleasure to be a part of this coalition that is proposing a recommendation for a $50 million appropriation to the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation. I will direct you back to Allie's testimony. There is a group of over 20 groups that are part of this coalition that have been working together on this, and I applaud the efforts of specifically Allie and Claire's efforts and their work over the last 2 years at looking at housing. And I appreciate this committee looking at this because this is a critical discussion that is surrounding a significant issue that has long-term effects. And we've seen it for decades. We've talked about it, but we haven't acted on it. You're probably wondering why the Kansas Bankers Association is so actively engaged in this too. Well, it's pretty simple. If you don't have jobs and you don't have housing, you don't have economic development. It's that simple. And at the direction of the chairman of our board, Mike Avey from Coffeyville, Kansas, last year, the Kansas Bankers Association formed a community and housing development task force to look at issues specifically focused at today. We knew the statewide housing study was going to be released. I actually had the pleasure of serving on that technical committee that provided feedback on that study that was released in December. And we wanted to be partners, and we wanted to be resources and to figure out ways we can help on these issues. They are critical. So from the KBA, we recognize that there is a shortage of attainable housing for both low-income and moderate-income Kansans. A shortage of quality housing is an undeniable barrier to economic growth and development for any community, whether it be rural or urban, but specifically rural. We are committed to seeing that everyone who dreams of home ownership has that opportunity, and we support policies that encourage improvement of existing houses, generate new constructions, and incentivize financial investment. So talk about the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation real quick and why we do support them. They have a long history of success. She mentioned they have, Ms. Devine they have industry representation on their board of directors. Actually, their chairman and vice chairman of their board of directors are bankers. One of them, the vice chairman of the board, was the former chairman of my board 3 years ago. Very good bankers that are providing oversight of that corporation that know what they're doing in urban and rural development. They have a long-standing success of getting money in from the federal government and leveraging those resources for more dollars. She talked about the $50 million as well and what our recommendations are. I'm not going to belabor that point because I think she did a great job, but I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about a couple of other issues before this legislature, because unfortunately, there's not a one way to fix this situation. You mentioned the $50 million, and it might not go a long way. It's very possible, but we do have to start somewhere. There are other bills before this legislature that are being considered right now that also look at housing. There are proposals outlined in Senate Bill 369, 375, 376, House Bill 2268, Senate substitute for HB 2212. These are all listed in my testimony, and actually I think Representative Curtis is also working on a bill, HB 2701. So a lot of bills that are out there. I'm specifically going to address SB 369 and 375, which is now included in Senate Bill 282. I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but Senate Bill 282 has a hearing before the House Tax Committee tomorrow afternoon. That's the major aviation tax bill that passed the Senate 33-4 a couple weeks ago. But there's two proposals within that legislation. One, which is 369, would enact the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit, and the other one is the Affordable Housing Tax Credit. Both programs would set aside annual amount of tax credits that would be available and administered by KHRC for rural and urban development, focusing on both moderate income and low income development or renovation. I'm going to direct you to, if you have not looked at the Kansas Housing Study, I would encourage you to do so, but I'm going to tell you it's a huge document. It's almost 300 pages. So if you want the abbreviated version, there is a goals and strategy document, and I know Mr. Vincent is going to address this in his testimony, but I'm going to talk about one of the goals. For adding or freeing up more middle income housing. Capital or incentives for these projects is often harder to find, and returns on investments are seen as lower. To address this, a mix of incentives should both improve existing houses and generate new constructions. That is the first goal that was released in the study. I bring that up, and I bring these other bills up to state not to compete with the $50 million today, but to say that there needs to be multiple approaches to fix this issue. And so I hope you're looking at those other pieces of legislation. I applaud the chairman's efforts also on his work on HB 2268. I think we need to put more money in that program regarding the Rural Home Loan Guarantee Program. In talking with my bankers that I represent and also the Federal Home Loan Bank of Topeka on some of their housing programs, that program could be the difference of a rural house being built or not. It's a good piece of legislation, and we support that. So I appreciate this committee's efforts, and I'm trying to be brief. I'm usually not brief, you know that, committee. But I appreciate your efforts. We appreciate the coalition's efforts, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to 2268 and the $2 million, where does that fit in with the $5 million under the guaranteed financing that Ally talked about?
Yes. So in HB 2268, it has $2 million set aside for that program. What we're proposing in this proposal is we actually need to put $5 million in there. It's the same program.
Okay. And the program doesn't exist at all?
Correct. No.
Okay.
That bill is actually sitting in this committee. It passed out of House Financial Institutions and Rural Development earlier this year, was blessed, and was sent to this committee.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Helgerson.
I'm assuming that most of the banks in the association make home loans. Is that correct?
It depends on the institutions, but yes, a lot of them do make home loans. Some of them are focused, some of them are just commercial banks, though, at the same time.
Some of them are just commercial, okay. Have you ever entertained the idea of having a low-cost subsidized loan that you take the federal money that you have that comes in and not loaning it out at the current rate, but at a reduced rate, so you're breaking even after the costs and making it available?
Representative, I have not, but
Has your board ever looked at that?
we have not discussed that at our board level, no.
Okay, thank you.
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I mean, I was in the banking industry, well, corporate finance for 12 years, banking for 6, and I did home mortgages throughout the state of Kansas. Actually, when I worked for the institution that I worked for, I was the mortgage lead for all of the banks for that entity throughout the state of Kansas. And what you have is, even in your larger banks, which is one I worked for, because they were headquartered out of Kansas City and had a footprint in about 8 other states, or if you look at a locally owned bank, they can't leverage a 30-year mortgage. The risk is too great. And so what they do is they will either look at a 3 or a 5-year ARM when financing a property, or they will sell it to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, namely. It's just because those banks can't have that leverage on the books because of the extent and the risk. So a lot of your home mortgages are actually sold off. There are some that are done in-house. I'm not going to dispute that fact. We did them at the institution I was at. But you had to qualify. I mean, you had to have the 5 C's of credit in order to qualify for that. But what we're trying to address here, and I think this kind of goes back to your question, if not, maybe I misinterpreted it. But what the issue you have is that the cost, especially now with inflation, with the cost of materials and goods, is that by the time you build that home, it far exceeds the appraised value. And that was the purpose of 2268, is to have that gap where the banks are able to finance that, because otherwise you're probably not going to have the individual being able to come with $100,000 down payment to offset the loan to value ratio. And so that is what the purpose of 2268, and then this is kind of addressing that as well, is because you don't have developers that want to go out into rural parts of the state, because once you actually have the cost of building those homes, or either the multifamily homes, whatever the case may be, the appraised value is so less that it's not advantageous for them to do that. But we still have a need out there because we have jobs that are being created. I think Ms. Devine put that in her testimony, and also did Ms. Gustin, that we have, existing companies are wanting to expand, but we don't have the housing. And for example, I'll just mention that we've had a lot of individuals, I will say, fleeing the state of Colorado and moving into the state of Kansas. And they've been buying properties all across my district, Smith County, Osborne County, Russell County. And we've been seeing an influx of people from Colorado buying property because they're wanting to leave the state of Colorado and come to the state of Kansas. And that is drying up all the existing homes that we used to have for sale in the rural areas. Representative Helgerson?
Whether or not, and I appreciate the information, whether or not it's the state of Kansas putting in $50 million or whatever it is, we're subsidizing an amount here. There's nothing saying that banks cannot put together a fund that subsidizes $50 million or $10 million or whatever it is with all of the assets that they have, and provide that security for a loan program also. That's been talked about different times over the years. I understand that there's a housing crisis. Heck, I remember when Alaska and other areas had needed oil employees, and they'd bring in temporary housing in order to take care of it because they didn't have housing and they couldn't build housing. We're making a question, we're deciding whether or not we're going to subsidize this need, and maybe that's what we want to do. But I'm also looking at one of the strongest financial arms in the state, and what are they doing? Well, they could also put in a loan program that helps subsidize homes and the building of homes for a whole range of people. I don't know, what's your interest rates right now to the most preferred individuals?
It depends on the institution, Representative. And without even, I don't want to give you a number without checking with a banker.
I'm just saying that the state is becoming not the last, but the first point of funding, as opposed to the last point of funding for these needs. And there's a need, and we should look for all the different areas, but we're putting this money in right now because we have the money. And I just raised a few questions.
Well, and going back to the rate question, being in the banking industry, my perspective was always my rate needs to reflect my risk. So depending on the individual, that's what the rate would be set at. So I just wanted to explain. You might see a going rate at 3.8% for a 30-year mortgage. Not everybody's going to qualify for that.
Yeah, right.
And so in the banking industry, the mantra is always my rate needs to reflect my risk. Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alex, thanks for your presentation. Can you tell me how the guaranteed financing for buyers works? Is it a deal where there's going to be some money in case of a default, or is that money going to go as a down payment to fill the gap between the appraisal and the cost of the house?
So it is a guarantee on the additional risk between the difference of the cost of the build and the appraisal, up to 125% loan to value.
So it's just a lump sum of money that'll sit there in case of a default of a loan, but if those loans all pay off or mostly pay off, It won't be touched.
We hope it won't be touched, yes.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could respond to
Yes.
Mr. Representative Heller's, that is why we did start our Housing and Community Development Task Force, is to look at as many ways as possible to be as helpful as we can. And I will take your comments back to our board.
Representative Williams.
Mr. Chair, and I'm still trying to understand if this solves the problem. The federal government printed billions of dollars, and it created a situation in the United States where we had a surplus of money. But as I look at the Kansas labor statistics, just looking at one single month per every single industry, we're down 18,000 people for non-farm, down 15,700 for private, goods and productions, down 2,400 employees there. We're down 16,000 for service providers. People can't find employees to work. For construction, we're down 1,900 jobs. So my question to you is, we have this massive amount of money that's creating inflation. The proposal that I see today is to add another $50 million. How is that? And we don't have labor, sufficient labor. If anybody wants to remodel their home or build a home, the prices are sky high. And in addition, it's hard. It may take you 6 or 9 months before you can even find someone to do your job if it's big enough for them. Representative Owens could speak to that more because he's in the industry. But my question is, how does this, adding $50 million, address the inflationary cost increases? And how does it not drive up costs more? And how does it address the real issue? We don't have anybody to do the work.
Sure. No, that's a great question, Representative. And, you know, it's a major concern, specifically looking at my generation. I mean, you guys are looking at maps right now and looking at population changes, and my generation is leaving this state. And it is concerning, without a doubt. I have many friends that I grew up with that in Wyandotte County that no longer live in Kansas. And the way I see this proposal today is enhancing current tools that we have at our disposal that we can try to do something to attract and retain current residents and businesses to our state. That is the goal of this. Will it fix it? I can't tell you with certainty that it will, but what we've been doing in recent years hasn't been adequate enough. And we have to try to do something here, and that is what the goals in the study, that's the reason why we did a statewide housing study. We haven't done one in 30 years. And that was what came out of that study, and that is what we're proposing here today, is addressing those goals. And so, Representative, I don't have the answer to your question. I don't. But our hope and with our intentions in our proposal today is to have more tools in the toolbox to help making housing more affordable, to build, to attract new residents, new businesses, and new jobs to all parts of our states. That's our intention today.
Okay, and just my last question. You don't believe that adding this additional state funding isn't going to drive up the price for those projects, and while it's simultaneously creating competition for those individuals that don't have this funding advantage? I see it as a competition issue as well, because we have a limited number of skilled workforce to do it.
No, Representative, good point. This is about public and private partnerships, and that is where it's needed. And you're going to hear from some developers next about what they're doing to help develop the next skilled workforce. I know we have a Northwest group here that partners with their technical college in Northwest Kansas to help train new builders. And so they're trying. But do I see this as competing with private enterprise? I don't, actually. I see this as supplementing and helping partner.
Representative Corbett.
Probably your 96 counties you're talking about are probably all declining in population with the last census. And we're kind of number 2 for affordable housing and number 4th or 5th for outward migration. I mean, this state works awful hard to make sure it doesn't grow. So anything you can do to get some jobs here and get some people here would be a blessing, because we're being taxed to death.
Representative Estes.
Thank you for being here. And being open and answering some of your questions. You used a phrase that kind of goes back to what Representative Helgerson said. You called it a public-private partnership, and I think his question, or my interpretation of his question, is what skin in the game are those who are putting this together to have? So I'm happy to hear that developers are going to address that. I see both sides of this issue, and what other skin in the game other people are putting together, it would be very meaningful to me. So let's take real estate commissions for the people selling the properties. When I think of my children who are young and one has already bought their first house and how hard that child worked to save up their down payment all by themselves, and we're taking money from the taxes that he pays to help someone else with theirs because we're in a crisis. It's a struggle to reconcile all of that. So the more I can hear about skin in the game that the coalition is putting together would be helpful.
Any further questions for Alex? All right, seeing none, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
We'll go ahead and move on to the next presenter, and that is Joanne Knight from the Dodge City Ford County Development. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman and Representatives. I am here to present kind of what we've been doing in Dodge City. We've probably been one of the leaders in communities addressing our rural housing issues, but we are a long stretch from getting to where we need to go. Over the last about 8 years, we've built almost 800 housing units in Dodge City, and we've just really tackled it from a variety of different perspectives. We use the Moderate Income Housing Program to do an abandoned housing program where we flip houses in declining areas of the community. And then we also target that area with several other local programs that we've put together, like a paint dodge program, a restoration program. Probably one of the proudest things we have done is a few years ago we started partnering with our community college building trade students. At that time they had 2 students in the class and they were building sheds. Today there are 32 students in that class and they are building houses, either single family houses or duplexes for us each year, again in that targeted blighted area. I'm proud to say that some of those students have their own construction companies now, or they're working for some of our local builders. When we started, probably the program that helped us the most is the Rural Housing Incentive District, which is the community giving up the property taxes oncoming from all the local taxing districts to help with the public infrastructure on those lots. That's the program that we probably finished about 600 houses units through, and then also have taken a couple of our builders and made them developers, and today we have 5 local builders that are now developers building multifamily projects. We also just recently, with the LIHTC program through Khrc, they were awarded a new builder from Oklahoma that is coming into Kansas to build. There are 40 units in the LIHTC grant that they received, but they are building another 40 market and looking at property for another 200 market rate units for our community. It takes years, it takes a concerted effort, but I'd rather be dealing with growing pains than dying pains. And we are really now, we're already showing that we're about 1,600 units still short for up to 2030, but we've also just recently also announced that Hilmar Cheese Processing is coming to Dodge City. That plant will be bringing 260 employees. It's a $600 million project now, and they will also be bringing in dairies up to 90,000 additional cows, which will be another 750 employees and about $550 million in investment. And so we've got a couple years while they're building to get geared up for theirs. And the sad thing is that some of the rural communities around us and Dodge City, if we can't get that permanent housing in, they're going to be coming in trailer houses and RVs. And we want their families. And so we need to make every effort we can. I think it's a great opportunity for all of Southwest Kansas and Kansas as a whole to bring this type of premier business to our state that can bring generations to come with these families that'll come in with them. So we've had exceptional experience in working with KHRC. There's just not enough, as I said. So we are very supportive of this ask and hope that you will consider it. I'd stand for any questions.
All right, thank you, Joanne. Representative Ballard.
Thank you. Your presentation was encouraging. What I see happening there is that you were what you would call grow your own. And it seems like that's what you did. If you started with a class with 2 and then now it's in 32 and people are working for other construction people, started their own companies and everything else. So it was a shortage of labor, but you are creating those opportunities for people to do that. You mentioned the new company that's coming in. And everything else. I'm sure part of that, when they were coming in, it was somewhat negotiated that you would have good schools and that you have housing available. Am I correct?
Yes, definitely. And I think their side of that was there was a housing and a workforce shortage everywhere, but they felt like that we were working together as a community in the right direction, and we've got the programs in place, and we have the opportunity to be able to meet their needs.
Thank you. I wish you well on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions for Ms. Knight? Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. It's very encouraging. But I have a question, and it may be in your testimony. I'm scanning. I didn't see. The value per unit that you've been building with the 600 or 800 new, and what I'm trying to get at is it apartment buildings or is it duplexes? What kind of housing does it?
It is all over the place. We do a housing assessment every 3 years, and we actually, since 2000, have used the same company that the state used. And I was on the Housing Technical Committee for that group as well. But we divide it out in ranges of incomes for rentals and income for homes for sale. And we evaluate that every 3 years. So if there's an area that we're overbuilding in, we could pull the RHID incentive or the neighborhood revitalization program or something. But we have just continued to grow. And so we still have a larger need than we did when we started, which is a great problem to have.
So what is the kind of the value per unit, do you know?
They're all over the board. We've used it for low-income tax credit apartments that rent for $400 or $500 a month. We've used it for $700,000, $800,000 homes for sale. It just depends on what the developer's looking at doing for the RHID areas, and then what program we're tagging it to it. So with the moderate income housing program, a lot of times we move houses in onto a vacant lot, but we target the price investment in that to where a moderate income person could afford to purchase it.
I'm still not getting a range of dollars per unit, and it's okay, somebody else may have it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Any other further questions for Ms. Knight? Representative Estes.
I'd like to make sure I understood what you just said. You guys have built houses that cost $700,000 to $800,000?
In developments that are using the RHID. That is a local program that has to be approved. The district has to be approved by Commerce, but it's all the foregone taxes, property taxes, to put the public infrastructure in, from the school district, the community college, the city, and the county.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you for being here, Ms. Knight, and thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Matt Gillum, who's going to be addressing the committee. Welcome to committee, Matt.
Morning, Chairman, committee. My name is Matt Gillum, and I am the managing partner of Overland Property Group. Our company specializes in housing development and is headquartered in Salina, Kansas, with offices in Leawood, Kansas, Denver, Colorado, and Dallas, Texas. The past 18 years, we have developed around 70 different developments totaling over 4,000 apartment units. Additionally, I am the president of the Kansas Housing Association, who I'm here representing today. KHA is an alliance of over 60 different companies and groups consisting of for-profit, not-for-profit developers, financial institutions, public housing authorities, chambers of commerce, economic development organizations, service providers, and organizations that are working to strengthen the state economic viability by making safe, decent, affordable housing available throughout Kansas. Housing is central to our economic development and job expansion. Being a developer who grew up in Salina myself and worked throughout Kansas and the Midwest, We hear this constantly from communities. Being one who does develop in numerous states, Kansas has some of the most unique and difficult housing challenges I see. Let me share a quick example with you to bring this home. This will illustrate the difficulties of developing a new, conventionally financed development without any of these public or private partnerships that we would typically develop in a metro-type market. So we have two new apartment developments. Let's just, for instance, say this one's in Olathe and this one's in my hometown of Salina. They cost about the same to build. I'll explain that here in a second. The new apartment units in Olathe would on average get me $1.60 to $2 in square foot per month in rent. That exact same building in Salina would get me on average 80 cents to $1 per square foot in rent. So you've got an 800 square foot apartment in Olathe and Salina. In Olathe, it's renting for between $1,280 and $1,600. And in Salina, it's renting for $640 to $800. That alone does not work. There is no way the math works. Zero. So holding all else equal, there is no way that the Salina project gets done. Rents with a conventional loan and lender just aren't going to happen. So now it gets worse. We're going to take into consideration there's actually a difference in the number of units you can build. So due to the market study and what is considered a healthy capture rate, we can't build any more than 80 to 100 units in Salina, while in Olathe we can build the ideal development size for economies of 300-ish units. So now we're going back to the construction costs. The reason I use construction costs that are roughly the same in Olathe and Salina is because on a per unit basis, they end up being very similar, if not the same. Salina would benefit from lower land costs, lower design requirements with the city, but be hurt in lower contractor availability. And in Olathe, building more units gets us economies of scale, and it spreads out fixed costs. When you throw in consideration for operating costs when these are up and running, the additional units in Olathe allow us to reduce the ongoing operating costs on a per unit basis versus a Salina development. So again, on a per unit basis, it is cheaper to operate the Olathe property than the Salina property. These operating costs are instrumental in long-term viability and model, which lowers the amount of debt that development can carry. So as expenses increase on a per unit basis, the amount of permanent debt decreases. All this cash is going to pay expenses and it's not able to cover the debt of a mortgage. Another hit keeps coming when the potential lender's appraisal happens, it comes back showing that it cannot support the cost of construction. They likely point to not having good comps in the market, and rents, while low, aren't demonstrated to scale or at all. So again, the rents that are there, while they are low, they are not demonstratable in an appraisal. This low appraisal subsequently and substantially increases the required capital the developer and his investors must put up at closing. So while in Olathe, we maybe only have to put up 20 to 25% at closing, in Salina, we may have to put up 50 to 100% of the total costs. So any loan that the bank does have probably comes with substantially higher developer guarantees and stipulations, which is substantially more risk to me. So to recap this example, Salina rents roughly half of what they would be in Olathe, about the same per unit cost to develop to build. Operating expenses about 25% higher in Salina versus Olathe. Developer investors having to put up substantially more cash to close, sign stiffer guarantees, and overall take on substantially more risk. But let's just pretend that I want to do the Salina deal anyway. Let's just pretend maybe, I don't know, I like risk and I want to do something for my hometown. My wife would be very angry if I was saying these things in front of her, but you know, it is one of those things that if you did go out and find an investor and say, we're just going to go ahead and do this, that investor probably needs to be willing on 100 units to put up anywhere between 8 to 16 to 20 million. They would not get a return on their investment. Zero. Not only would they probably not get a return on their investment, it would probably end up losing money month by month by month. So their initial investment does not stop there. It continues on. Best case scenario is you get a return of your investment someday, but nothing on your investment. So this is the basic problem. Why take substantially more risk with developing something that doesn't, or at best barely pencils with zero profit for an investor, developer, builder? I'll point out that while I use Salina as my example, I could replace Salina with almost any other city in Kansas that isn't in select cities within Johnson, Sedgwick, or Wyandotte County, and it still rings true. Actually, it probably gets worse. The quick example I shared was something that I developed years ago and have updated over time. I developed it because I would constantly hear people say the free market would eventually correct itself with housing in Kansas. Well, I believe that a good real estate developer is nothing more than a relationship-driven problem solver. We have millions of problems that come up on each and every development. However, some problems we simply can't solve without help in a public and private partnership. We have a real problem with housing in Kansas, one that unfortunately won't leave the crisis stage until we supercharge the current solutions, for instance, the low-income housing tax credit program and the moderate income housing program, and we create new programs that can individually be tailored and flexibly used to fit a variety of developments and communities. I appreciate the time and consideration for your testimony, and I'm here for any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Matt. Representative Helgerson.
I appreciate the detailed work that you've done. So there's no easy solution.
That's correct.
We basically, the state, and Johnson County and Sedgwick County and all the urban areas decide that we're going to subsidize not only the 50 million, because the 50 million is a drop in the bucket, isn't it?
The 50 million, in my opinion, is not just the 50, it is the leverage that the 50 gets. So the moderate income housing program is used towards infrastructure. So that infrastructure typically on developments we do is 10% of the overall development costs.
But the 50 million can be used a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road. But from everything you've said, the 90 plus counties or 100 counties, they need an influx of money every year, every year, every year, every year from now on. If we're going to deal with the housing issue, you know, just a straight business, we're going to have to subsidize that developers can't make a profit in building property out there because the costs are too high. Even if we subsidize taxes, subsidize the land, subsidize the specials, they won't break even. So this means a conscious, concerted effort of spending tens of millions of dollars every year. And whether or not, you know, you've come before us, and I'm impressed because you can tell me this is what the cost is, this is what it is here, and, you know, Salina versus Johnson County, and I'm saying I appreciate it, but you have to have also looked out in the future, and I have too, and it's not 50 million we're talking about. It's talking about hundreds of millions of dollars if we go down this path. How much do we need?
So I would respectfully disagree with some parts of that. Salina is a perfect example. It's easy because it's my hometown. We used a development there. We used low-income housing tax credits. These are federal funds through the Reagan administration's, original idea of this program, public-private partnership. And that helped us kickstart the Lee Jeans building in downtown Salina. And through then conversations with the city of Salina, they wanted market rate housing, which we obviously did too. And we said, hey guys, here's the problem. It doesn't pencil. Let us be open book. Let's show you the pro forma. They said, you know what? We need it that badly. We're willing to step to the plate and write a check. We said, okay. Came to the partnership. They wrote a check in for, it was a little north of $500,000 to cover the gap to get 12 units of market rate housing inside of a, development that we had the vehicle. We were adding a small trailer onto the back, which is the ideal situation. But the reason that I would respectfully disagree with what you said earlier is Salina now has 12 market rate units in an apartment complex that demonstrates rents, which then will allow me the next time I come to town to get an appraisal that actually has comp rents that are, they're to levels that we think we could actually get something done in. So in some ways it breaks the cycle that we are in. So you've got to start some investment into these communities to start breaking that cycle.
Representative Helgerson.
As you may know or may not know, I'm the hard ass in this group. And
I like it. I'm a developer. I get shot at all day, so I'm used to it.
So do I. My fear in this is how big of a hole are we going to have to go? 50 million? Is it 50 million for 10 years and that'll take care of the housing problem? Hell, I can come up with 500 million or 50 million this year for the next 10 years.
Yep.
How much takes care of the rural housing? Not everything, but would do it. 5 years of 50 million? Is that what we should be looking at?
Personally, I think it's a variety of housing programs. I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all. I think the MIH program is versatile. It's available to be used for a lot of different instances, which makes it a great tool when you're trying to solve complex problems. But I think that this problem in Kansas is not one that we can throw one thing at. I think we have to put our tool bag together, and that's what we've got to go to issue. So to answer your question, I couldn't begin to tell you what it's going to take,
Yeah.
but I know it's going to take a lot of
together. I'm sorry. You put the figures together. Give us an idea. Is it $200 million take care of the housing? If we sunsetted the program and said, here's $200 million, we think we can get the best chance of putting our housing back, bring back people to provide all of the housing that we're going to need for the jobs that we think we're going to grow, and do this over a 5-year or a 3-year or a 10-year period and say, that takes care of it.
So I can't answer that specific question. There's smarter people in the audience that probably could. I'm an individual developer that represents through KHA a lot of different groups, but we're not the ones compiling the statewide. Like I said, I just know the communities we deal in, the problems we see.
Representative Helgerson.
I appreciate your patience. Thank you. My fear is that once we start the big program or a program, we don't stop it. And that's what happens here in state government. I like to put a dent in the program and say, now you're on your own. And, I'm trying to figure it out. Since I used to, I think I'm the only one that used to run a not-for-profit construction company that did work for elderly and low-income people. I know weatherization, housing repair, etc. But I also know the state government, and I'm real nervous about a big chunk of money going out there, and suddenly it's not going to be stopped. So if anybody else has some solutions, let me know, and I'll try to work with you.
I would tell you that, as somebody who does work in a lot of different states, we're seeing a lot of resources be put out there right now. And, part of that is they're seeing success with some of these programs. The MIH program's been around. It's leveraged, this infrastructure investment. It's a proven, opportunity to do that. The state tax credit program in Colorado, they are in the process of doubling that right now because it's been so successful of leveraging it into additional. So again, to answer your question, I think, in my opinion, this is something that, it has to be let's see where this goes. But I would say $2 million a year, the MIH program has leveraged that into, somebody else probably has the figures, but 5, 6, 7, 8 times the $2 million investment, from a statewide opportunity perspective. So this isn't just us taking $2 million and putting $2 million into the development. This is taking $2 million and leveraging that $2 million into 20 to 30 to 40. So,
Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Matt, thank you so much for being here. You have provided an enormous amount of information and experience that goes a long way in this committee. I play, and I use that loosely, I play with my construction company building some houses and doing some developing, and you guys do it and do it well. Your example talked more specifically about apartment units and leveraging that. I would say a number of things come to mind, and by the way, I have no solutions, but there's so much information here to be kept in perspective when we look at what's going on in the state. First of all, a lot of our small towns don't need apartment complexes. They need single-family residences, okay? To develop a piece of land, the last time that I attempted to develop a piece of land, create 44 lots, and this was pretty good land, pretty level, not a whole lot of drainage, whole lot of work. You're looking at $3 million in infrastructure to create 44 lots ready to build on. And that comes up to about $69,000 per lot, or about $280 per month for 20 years in specials. The developer is the one that bears all of that risk nearly. And that's why I realized that that's a way bigger game than I know how to play, and so I didn't do it. Because I'm the one responsible as a developer. They're the ones that are responsible for ultimately paying those specials. That's why statistically 70 to 85% of residential real estate developments go defunct. Watch your tax sales. You will see developers that have went to develop, that have signed up for the infrastructure, and 4 years later can't pay the bill. And so 4 years of no taxes and no specials, and they're praying somebody else comes and buys it and eats it because the failure rate is so incredibly high. The other thing that we have to take into consideration here is just how affordable Kansas is. Okay, unless you do business outside of this state, you don't realize how affordable Kansas is. Let me throw a perspective out there for you. We build houses in the Utah Valley. You're not building a 3-bedroom house for under $500,000. Now, I haven't figured out how people get financing for these $500,000, $600,000, $800,000 houses, but by gosh, it's normal. And maybe Alex can help me understand how banks out there do it for, you know, the average professional and not here. But we're seeing this. We're seeing these numbers creep up in Kansas. Did anybody looked at their property tax statement lately?
Let's talk about that.
Okay, 10% increases are pretty standard. Oh, 24, there you go, okay. Hold on for the ride, folks, because Kansas is affordable, but it won't be forever. We're gonna start creeping up like the Colorados and the Utahs and other areas because of just that. The cost to build far exceeds the appraisal because our used inventory has not caught up value-wise to new building. And so as a result, this idea of affordable housing, when I was in Utah talking to somebody, a little story, they couldn't believe you could buy a house out here in some of our small towns for under $100,000. They couldn't fathom that because it doesn't exist in most places in the state or in this country. We have a lot of work to do. I appreciate your experience. I want to do more. I want to learn more, but the reality is it is so cost prohibitive and things are so out of balance right now when it comes to new building versus used prices that I don't know. I mean, I think $50 million would certainly help in some areas, but as Representative Helgerson mentioned, I don't think it puts a dent in this problem. And the question then becomes, how do we determine which communities this makes more sense for? Dodge City is obviously growing, right? They have a need. But if Meade applies for this money, but they don't have that growth, it doesn't make sense for it to go there from a speculation standpoint. I could go on for a long time. I won't. More importantly, thank you for being here. Thank you for your experience, your expertise, because none of us on this committee have that to fully understand the complicated depth of the housing issues in Kansas.
Sure.
Thank you.
And one thing I will mention is, you know, we partner with Khrc for a lot of different types of programs. We did not secure the MIH grant that we actually worked with, but the City of Larned did. We came in as basically a development expertise partner to help them execute on that, took the construction risks so that, you know, that could get done. But Khrc, you know, really has done a great job of looking at the demand and need and then finding the right people to partner. Because of the way these funds work, they, you know, roll through the city and counties and eventually end up through the developments. But specifically with those, I do believe that demand, while it is high everywhere, because these need to be shovel-ready projects, it encourages cities to go out and call folks like myself or other developers because, you know, I do think those partnerships is how we solve this and being creative as Kansans. So, you know, I've said it for years, there's no magic bullet. I really don't think there is. I think even if you threw, you know, an unlimited amount of money at this, you know, that is not the right move here. The right move is this, start scaling it in, see where it goes, let it be leveraged. But just wanted to cover that because I do want to say that I believe Khrc has done a pretty great job of trying to find those partnerships and places to make sure the money goes to work as well as possible.
And a quick follow-up, and I appreciate that because the solution doesn't lie in this room. The solution lies with our cities and our counties as well.
Exactly.
Because ultimately, that partnership has to exist. The $3 million in infrastructure that I mentioned, the city is bonding that, but all the risk falls to the developer because the numbers just don't work. I mean, it's really simple. Like you said, pencil it out. It doesn't work. So thank you for that.
And to be honest with you, I think that's, you know, I'm the one up here, I've taken the risk, but I also do believe that that's how this works. The developers are somebody who, you know, we're for-profit entities. We understand good developments and bad developments. Us taking the risk almost ensures that, you know, we're going to make sure the best product goes out there and it's going to be successful. But to your point, it does not happen without partnerships such as Joanne's in Dodge City. We partnered with them, and she didn't give herself enough credit for just how great they are at trying to solve that housing problem. So thank you.
We have to decide whether we're going to be involved in essence public housing or not. I mean, that's a conscious policy decision that we have to decide on. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you start a project, what do you think the length of time is from kind of the initial concept of the project until completion? Do you have, like, these things don't happen overnight, do they?
No, depending on the financing mechanism or source, depending on the city and their entitlements and their, you know, we're going through entitlements right now in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. It's about a year-long process, but in Salina, that process, you know, is 90 days, so that helps. But if I was to, you know, give you a range, I'd say from absolute start to finish, if this wasn't one that was kind of a legacy project that drug out forever, you really just don't get these things done faster than 24 to 36 months. Construction, you know, alone is 10 to 12 months, but to put the deal together, get the financing lined up, you know, I think 24 months is kind of the front side of that.
And so when we're looking at what the applications were for the moderate income housing deal last year, I believe it was 10 million. Probably not all of those 10 million were good projects. I mean, there is some evaluation of projects, I assume, by the Housing Trust. This money actually could last easily 3 or 4 years as projects are developed and then accepted into the process and then continue on to completion. So this money that we invest now, we might not have very many houses on board for 2 or 3 years, correct? Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, and I defer to KHRC as far as how quick they see the money going out there. You know, for instance, when we utilize programs and we get that funding secured, it's kind of the all-out sprint to, okay, now let's get to closing. And depending on who your partners are and the fire hoops and whatever other hoops they can dream up to run you through in due diligence and closing. But yeah, I would say, you know, there is just naturally a long lead time in this business.
And we will have Ryan Vincent with KHRC presenting. We have one other presenter, and then Ryan Vincent will be joining us by WebEx.
And again, I do want to thank you for sharing your expertise with the committee. I know when we talked about the 20 million that was in Commerce earlier, in my hometown, we built a 48-unit apartment complex because I think maybe your company had a low-income housing apartment in that community. And the frustration of the people at home was that the tax subsidized dwellers are living in nicer stuff than we are because nobody can make it work. And I'm also glad that you shared that it's not just my failure to execute that we don't make any money off of this deal. It's really a Chamber of Commerce type deal. And Representative Owens, the real money is in the single-family dwellings and flipping them if you can figure out a way to make that work. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Well, I'll just be brief. I'm just wondering here, every committee that I'm going to, it sounds like that Kansas just can't stand on its own, that government needs to be the answer to everything. And whether it's housing, whether it's STAR bonds, whether it's community improvement districts, whether it's industry related, jobs related, with a migration of more people exiting the state rather than entering the state, it's the only thing I hear is that government is the only answer. So my question to you, is government the only answer to this housing problem?
No, it takes every single one of us. It really does. It takes a partnership, public and private. It has to. I can't do it alone. I showed you the numbers on why I can't. But to your point, it's also a little bit of an arms race. My contractor in Topeka right now is working in 5 communities in Texas, because they have funding programs and mechanisms to put these dollars to work. I'm sending them to Colorado. I'm sending them to Missouri. And they're using some local subs, national subs. We've got national contractors. But those resources are not coming to Kansas because we don't have the ability to fix our housing problem right now. We need help to do that. So no, I do not believe the solution falls on you. I've tried to fix this solution through, we invented a program we were calling Plain Smart, which was kind of a developer partnering with business owners to invest in housing in these communities. I've tried to throw numerous things at the wall. So from a private business perspective, we have tried everything we can, and this is our last resort.
Mr. Chairman, just the question that I proposed earlier, we have too much money in the system and not enough skilled workforce. That's a terrible combination for equation that you're trying to solve. And the proposal doesn't address that, but what it does do is it potentially creates a long-term need for funding. And every committee we go to, we are growing government, growing government, growing government, with this inflation that's just driving costs to the ceiling. So I don't know that you addressed either of those issues, the cost, there's so much money in the system, and 2, the skilled labor.
I would say that from a cost perspective, this isn't a program that you invest in it this year and next year and the year after, and the 4th year it's shut down, it evaporates. That is still there in the hundreds of units that families are living in and have been created through that program in those 4 years of funding. So I again, respectfully disagree with that particular side. And from a skilled labor perspective, we're all seeing it. It's no question that it exists out there right now. But again, unless we have the work and the need to pull these folks into Kansas, they're going other places. I mean, my team, which is a national developer, we used to be primarily in Kansas, and we used to develop 95% in the state of Kansas and 5% outside of it. And now I am at 95% outside of the state of Kansas, 5% in it, because there are not the funding mechanisms to make housing or create housing in this state. So I've got my teams in other places now. Our team's grown substantially, and so the economies have changed a little. But I think this has to be a solution where public-private partnerships happen. And, there are some things out there that you're not going to solve it all at once. We're not going to solve the labor issue today, but we've got to take a bite out of this apple because we've sat on the sidelines for too many years and we've not leveraged to try to help our housing issue and bring these jobs back to Kansas.
Okay, we're going to have one more question for Matt. We do have 2 other presenters, so we need to move on. So Representative Estes.
Thank you. My question, you may not be able to answer, but you talked about the domino effect of appraisals. So this is almost a request because I don't think you would have had time to do this, but could you and the coalition please update your assumptions based on the new appraisals, since everybody got huge increases on their appraisals in terms of comps? But I also want to acknowledge that you're in a fluid situation because when the appraisals are going up, inflation is always also coming up. So if you guys have the ability to take a look and make sure that your assumptions are still accurate, that would be appreciated.
So when it comes to rental housing, which is primarily what I deal in, and again, I develop in rental, but I think there's a demand for all types of housing. I think that's the only way communities are vibrant and viable, is to have a range of housing. But particularly in rental, the problem is not those appraisals on single-family homes and apartment developments. It's actually in that market that rents don't exist, so the appraiser can't go out and find a comparable rent or find a comparable apartment complex. In Kansas City, we recently developed a senior community in Leawood, and it was a little out of market because of the type it was. It was on the higher end side, and it had some unique aspects about it. But because there's so many other developments that are recent and new in the Kansas City MSA, they could go and find some things. They found something up in Briarcliff that they could use. But when those things are out in Dodge City and Garden City, they can't go and try to get creative and say, well, this has kind of got this component, and it's kind of got this component. It just doesn't exist. So they come back to us and they say, we can't get comfortable with these rents, and so we're going to, we believe that they should be $150 per unit lower. We can't get comfortable with, obviously, then your construction costs. So this is what it comes out to be. Maybe we need $10 million to build it, and that's the cheapest, but the appraisal comes in at 6. So now an investor's got to cover that 4. And so, single-family homes going up in value in some ways doesn't solve my problem on the rental side. It certainly helps with the home builders, and I think that's great. And, certainly that helps solve that because, again, housing is needed kind of throughout the spectrum. But thank you.
All right, thank you, Matt, for being here. We're going to go ahead and move on to Josh Rowe, who's going to be joining us. Thank you, Josh.
Good morning, Chairman Waymaster, members of the committee. Josh Rowe with Kansas Corn Growers Association. And really, my role in this has been to turn what we've heard about, all this anecdotal evidence that we have a rural housing shortage, to try to quantify that. What is the need for rural housing? And so my testimony included, it's kind of 4 pages of a lot of numbers and tables there, and just want to highlight a couple of things on that. What we used is the latest 2020 census data and then the housing needs survey as compiled there. First thing we looked at in those counties of 60,000 or less in population, I looked at the percent of houses rated as poor condition or below. Some of those numbers are very astonishing. I think the highest one being Greeley County at 61% of their housing rated at poor or below there. And so if we take that percent of poor housing times what the number of households are there, you see that overall in these 96 counties, there's 37,725 houses. That's obviously well beyond the scope of this coalition and all that. And so we took a step back and said, hey, what if we just replaced 1% of this poor housing inventory in these 96 counties? What does that look like? And so that number is, that would be 4,217 homes. So if we take kind of the typical KHRC contribution per home of $25,000, that would show that there would be a need of over $105 million for that. So we see there is a great need out there. That's obviously, that number's beyond the scope of what this one-time ask that we're putting out there. And so just one last thing, you see all the numbers there. I've compiled numbers for each of you on the committee. If you have counties that have below 60,000 in population, how that adds up and what your district numbers are. If we haven't given you those numbers yet, I've got them here with me, and we'll get them out there. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Josh. I'm not seeing any questions, so thank you again for being here. The last presenter that we have is Ryan Vincent with the Kansas Housing Corporation, and he's joining us by WebEx. Ryan?
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
No. We need to have the volume turned up in here. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, thank you for this opportunity. I know you've had a long hearing and great dialogue. I'm not going to belabor it. I know I presented just on KHRC and the overall programs we administer. I do want to touch on just a couple of things. I appreciate you allowing me to present virtually today since I'm traveling. Mainly wanted to highlight a couple of things that have come up during this discussion. One is a great question just about timeline. How quickly will housing get built if we end up getting funding for our trust fund? And of course, it will depend on which development, but if it's moderate income housing, assuming that we receive the funds July of 2022, we would be issuing an RFP that month. We would be awarding the funds to communities in the fall of 2022. We would start construction through the communities likely in late winter, early spring 2023. The units would start coming online approximately late 2023. So generally what we see is about an 18-month window from the time that we post our RFP to the time that the housing is actually coming online. As an example, in Alma, we just funded upper level story housing, awarded that in December of 2020, and that is just now coming online now. It's getting occupied today. So just as an example of the timeline of how we could move the funds, I want to address Representative Helgerson had some great questions just about how much dollars are needed and when does it end. And, I don't think that there's an exact number on how much is needed, but what we need to do is we need to start the process now, because what we see historically is that there's an economic multiplier that comes with housing investment. We know that there are jobs that are ready to expand, which would of course increase tax revenues, whether that's the dairy and Joanne mentioned in Dodge City, whether it's Tony's Pizza in Salina. What we see is that when we invest in housing, we're allowing for expansion of jobs, but we're also seeing, I was just in Sterling the other night, and it was a great example of how our MIH awards were made 8 years ago. It was a one-time investment. It allowed for moderate income housing units to be built in the community, but that same developer, once he started doing work in the community, he built relationships, built up a network of partners. He's continued to do development in that community that's been successful, that's been market rate, without any dollars from Khrc or from the state of Kansas. It's a catalyst. That's a one-time impact for that community that we can replicate statewide. A couple other things that have come up is just the building trade shortage. We recognize that's a huge issue, but we can't address it without actually investing in our building trades. We're doing that, whether it's in, again, Dodge City, working with community college students there who are actually building the developments that we're funding, whether it's in St. John's, where we partnered with the K-State School of Architecture. These are micro examples that are happening now through a $2 million a year program. Imagine what we could do with $25 or $50 million. We had a question come up about down payment assistance. That particular program is wonderful, but it's limited to 80% of area median income because it's federally funded. If we were to receive state funds, we could serve higher income households, which would take care of some of the challenges that you heard about from the bankers and from the other representatives you heard from today. That's the challenge, is that we don't have flexible funding, and that's the opportunity that the state funding offers. Lastly, you've heard a lot about kind of competition with the private industry. You've heard about skin in the game. We expect that, and we work that. We work with employers, whether it's in Rexford, where the employer actually put money towards the cost of the development. Our tax credit program itself was actually started by President Reagan, who realized that we need to have public-private partnership in order to be a catalyst for that development. Our MIH program works with community foundations, with local governments. Developers actually put in deferred development fee. So what we're doing is we're capturing all these separate pots of funds with the goal of putting it together. Khrc has a history and has been a proven expert in dot connecting. That's something that we offer you all as the state an opportunity to step in, to connect the parties, to connect the resources with some initial investment. Happy to answer any questions the committee has, and just appreciate the consideration for a dialogue that's been needing to happen for many years.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Are there any questions? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thank you again for being here, even if it is by WebEx, but thank you for your testimony. We do have written testimony committee by the Kansas Economic Development Alliance, also in regards to the rural housing needs across the state of Kansas. We are nearing 10:50, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item. I don't know how brief we'll be, but obviously if we're not able to get through everything today in regards to the profile from the budget office and also the profile from the research department, we will hopefully have them back tomorrow morning when we start the discussions in regards to the budget. Profile. All right, so the first individual I'm going to ask is, this has been asked by some members of the committee, is to have an updated profile from the budget director. And so I will invite the budget director, Adam Proffitt, to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. I think I will wait just a moment to allow the handouts to be handed out, if that's okay.
Actually, if you could go ahead and start, because we are pressed for time.
Okay. Very good. So thank you for the opportunity to come forward. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to have a dialogue about this and discuss some of the the alternate views on a profile and what the spending might look like. So what is being handed out right now is a profile that's got 2 pages. Page number 1 actually just has all of the assumptions, just so there's nothing hidden. Full disclosure on everything that's in there, what the starting point was, how we loaded the assumptions, and how far out we went. We built this candidly kind of in response to a profile that was shared some time ago after the Apex bill, or while the Apex bill was being deliberated, just to show what we feel might be happening. The assumptions in terms of phasing in some of the capital investment from any firms that might be procured through Apex, the influx of employees, things of that nature. We worked with the Department of Commerce on to get their take, since they are the ones that are most closely aligned with any negotiations with any firms that might be looking at coming to Kansas. So they instead of being 100% front-loaded, they're phased in as you might expect. So if I can walk through page 1 just real briefly, and then we'll get into the profile itself. So page 1 again has all the assumptions, and I'll start with each of the bolded bullet points. So the starting point from this for this was the GBR. I understand the committee has done a little bit of work with the budget, and some things are still in, and some things are not still in, but the budget is not yet final, so we just left the GBR as a starting point. That includes the food tax, it includes a $250 rebate, it includes all the one-time expenditures, so that the full GBR. It does hold the budget stabilization fund at $600 million from fiscal 22 and forward. What it does not do is assume that we will ever beat a revenue estimate between April and the end of the year, because if we did, that would add to the budget stabilization fund. So I try to not add in too much good news and just make this as conservative as is humanly possible. On the revenue side, the next point down, again, the starting point was the November CRE for revenues. I did add in the year-to-date beat for revenues, and that's $237.3 million. You could look at this one of 2 ways. You could say we're just going to hold the November CRE and put that forward, and that is what's in there. Or you could say if we did that, what we're really saying is we're going to anticipate missing by $237 million sometime in fiscal 22 if we don't recognize that it's in there. Any profile we put in front of you is largely assumption-based. The $237 million is not assumption-based. Those are real numbers that we have beaten, so we feel confident in putting those in there and ensuring that we're accounting for them in this profile. And that's a change from what was seen before. The revenue growth in the out years, fiscal 24 and beyond, we have at 1.8%. That's the same as what the profile was that you saw some time ago. It's also substantially lower than the revenue growth that we've seen over the past couple of years. So if you look at fiscal 22, we're looking at about a 4.7% growth over the previous year. If you look at the forecast for fiscal 23 as it stands today, we're looking at 3.2% growth year over year. So the 1.8% growth from fiscal 24 and beyond is recognition that revenue growth is likely to slow down in the coming years. So again, trying to be conservative there. On the expenditure side, again, starting point was the GBR. We did add $53.5 million for a GBA that was just sent out about 2 hours ago. So the committee has likely not had a chance to see that yet. But that money is in there to account for that cost. Part of that, there was a one-time deposit of $50 million and then a $3.5 million increase of the base. So that's in there and it flows all the way through. We added back in $14 million of SGF because, as you recall from the omnibus bill last year, there were a host of items that the legislature put in that said, here's some SGF for program X, but budget director, go out and find some federal dollars to supplant the SGF. We had not yet supplanted the SGF when the GBR was released for some of these, so that we were still showing SGF. Since that time, we have lapsed SGF and replaced with federal dollars, and that came out to about $14 million, so I did build that back in. We're growing K-12 at 3.3% in the out years. So we have the caseload estimates through fiscal 23. Fiscal 24 and beyond, we're growing at 3.3%. Very happy to see a new chair here. Maybe it'll be a more favorable committee. We're growing the K-12 in this assumption at 3.3%. I would point out that 3.3, that's driven by inflation. Right, so K-12 as we move forward is just going to be adjusted for the CPIU Midwest over a 3-year rolling period, right? On the revenue side, a lot of the revenues are largely driven by inflation as well, or inflation is a key component of it. So we're giving more weight on the cost side to inflation than we are on the revenue side. Again, just trying to be conservative to show a separation there. Growing Medicaid caseloads at 5%, so we start with the base year, what we've all agreed to, and then we grow it by 5% every single year. I'll tell you the last couple of years, Caseloads have grown somewhere between 0% and 1%. So the 5% is far above what we've been seeing on growth rate from Medicaid over the past couple of years. Again, trying to anticipate if there might be an increase in medical costs going forward. And then the expansion population grew at 3%. The next section, it says SGF relief not included in here. So specifically, the docking project at $120 million, the lab at $65 million, and then the KDM building and the Hayes Armory at about $40 million total. We're quite confident that we'll get at least 50% of federal dollars that we can use to lapse SGF. We haven't reflected that in here yet. So the second that we get the federal dollar okay, there's $115 million of SGF that will be loaded back into this profile. Means it increases the ending balance. Again, we haven't done it yet, so I didn't want to reflect the good news in the SGF just yet. And then the very bottom, the Apex assumptions. So there's a number of ways that Apex could go, right? So we loaded the max investment credit up to 15% on the suppliers, and over the shortest amount time frame, 5 years. So just call it worst case scenario, 15% on the investment, short time frame, 5 years. Phased in the capital investment by year. Again, working with Department of Commerce to see of any firms, what they might be thinking for CapEx. Same on the payroll side, loaded 7.5% over 10 years for the payroll credit. We did not assume all 4,000 employees start on day one because that would be a stretch. So we phased in the employee count based on when we think some launch teams might come and some other things. So we phased in the head count. One thing that we added in here that was not on the last profile is for every employee that's on the books, yes, there is a credit that goes out to the firm to cover some of that cost. But on the other side, there's only credit if somebody is working. And if somebody is working, there's 3.2% tax rate coming into the individual income line. So it's a bit of an offset to that cost. Full disclosure, the credit going out is larger than the income tax coming in, but that income tax coming in does have an offsetting effect on this. And we did not load a single ancillary benefit to this. So you hear a lot about some of the ancillary benefits that would come from an economic development project, number of hotel stays, number of food purchases, number of all that. We don't assume a single cheeseburger is bought in the state of Kansas as a result of 4,000 people coming in. We don't assume a single structure is built. We don't assume a single anything. No hotel stays, nothing. So there's no good news from these 4,000 employees being in the state. So again, just trying to show that it's being a conservative estimate when we put this out there. So those are the assumptions. If I can flip to the next page, which shows the actual profile.
Actually, Director Profit,
Please.
would it be possible for you to return tomorrow to go through the next portion of your presentation and then answer
Absolutely.
questions?
Yeah, I'd be happy
And
to.
then we'll also have JG go through the profile as well from the research department prior to us working the budget, because we are nearing the time where we need to be on the floor.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So committee, until 9 a.m. tomorrow, we are adjourned.